And we're live. So thank you for joining us. Hello and welcome. My name is Sean Johnson Andrews, and I'm your host. I'm the immediate past president of the Cultural Studies Association, and I'm broadcasting to you from the north side of Chicago.
And I'm Rob Carley. I'm your co-host, and I'm coming to you from Central Texas.
So thanks for joining us for this third episode of Breaking Culture Live. This program is an experiment that we hope will allow for the opportunity for cultural studies scholars and activists to share their knowledge and reflect on current events as they happen, and provide us a space for us all to gather, talk about what they mean and what we can do. So, as we've done the last 2 weeks, the plan is for us to meet on Wednesday around lunchtime in Chicago and New York, or brunch time on the west coast of the U.S., or as Pablo is joining us on the west coast of Argentina. We'll spend about a half an hour breaking down the breaking news with cultural studies scholars and activists, discussing their work and how it helps us to understand a contemporary event or emergent trend. So we have two segments today. First, we're going to talk between Rob and Mark Nunes and I about the 2026 Cultural Studies Association conference and the call for papers, which will be released in the next day or so, and the submissions will open on Friday. So Mark Nunes is the current chair of the New Media and Digital Cultures Working Group, and he's co-chair of the program committee with Rob, who is the current president of the CSA, and I helped in the later stages of the CFP. So we'll give some insight into the topic and the way that the conference will work this year. And then we'll talk to Argentinian scholar Pablo Castagno about the shocking victory of Javier Milei in the Argentine elections this week, and his relationship to the larger global right-wing project. So first, the CFP. We'll dig into the topic more in a moment, but just to give some of the basic information, the conference is scheduled to take place May 28th through 30th, 2026, and it will be held fully online. So this holding a fully virtual conference is part of a deliberate strategy that the governing board has agreed upon after a few years of experimenting with hybrid conferences. And while we also put on several well-received hybrid conferences in Chicago and Fairfax, Virginia, we want to make sure that those who come in person have a critical mass of fellow in-person participants. So before our last conference, which is a well-attended event held in person at the California Institute of Arts in Southern California, the governing board decided we would begin a 2-year cycle of in-person and virtual conferences in order to maximize the effectiveness of both. The CSA puts on a great virtual conference, and it allows for people from around the world, like our colleague Pablo from Argentina, as well as those with mobility or health concerns or visa concerns that would make travel more difficult, to participate in the events. So we've all worked for several years, including especially current Cultural Studies Association Vice President Dolores Phillips and others, to facilitate that virtual element of the conference. And we generally have great experiences doing this, and this year will be no exception. So we're happy to answer any questions about that. But probably more interestingly is the topic. So Rob and Mark, you were kind of more centrally involved in developing the call for papers. Do you want to say something about the topic of the conference, the topic of oppositions, I think?
Sure. Thank you, Sean and Rob. And just a minor correction. I did step down as chair for New Media and Digital Cultures. Reed
Oh,
Banks-Gannick is now acting as co-chair. Still involved in that working group, and I think the working group structure within CSA is really one of the fascinating differences of the organization and the conference arrangement. Not just sort of having these tracks of interest, but really trying to build networks of scholars to work together on projects. So yeah, we, as in years past, we try to come up with a theme that is both focused and also loose enough that it allows for interpretations, and also to fit within the many areas of interest that fall under the purview of cultural studies and the numerous working groups that we have within the organization. And it struck us that this seemed to be a time to address directly the notion of oppositions as we look out beyond our academic frameworks to events on the streets, social and cultural interactions, the degree to which we are seeing structures of power play out. The issue of opposition, its connection to a history in cultural studies, is something that seems timely for us to address. At the same time, we also wanted to sort of offer a provocation to think about the logic of oppositions and oppositionality, the way that that's deployed within framings in which any form of resistance or approach to social justice becomes framed as a sort of antithetical opposition to law and order, and also some of the ways in which cultural studies can operate within that kind of logic of opposition, this logic of binaries. So on one hand, sort of addressing the political and social context of opposition, but also thinking in terms of discourses of oppositionality and how these can be structures of limitation and resistance, as well as structures of openings and possibilities.
Yeah, great. Rod, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think shifting focus to a keyword like oppositions in the context we're in now, it raises certain issues, or it shifts the lens in cultural studies from resistance to something else. I think so. I think there's like several ways to kind of legitimate the idea that we might have entered into a sort of phase, whether we describe it as an interregnum or something else, where it might be more fruitful to think in terms of oppositionality as opposed to resistance, right? There isn't really a sustained set of a kind of movement organizations or movement coalitions that would kind of evoke a sense of resistance. What we see playing out is actually in many ways people taking oppositional stances quite literally. Like when we look at what's happening in places like Chicago, we see an opposition. But also, too, to extend the idea, we also think about this idea of like Mark was mentioning, that there's a sort of discourse that poses things in a binary framework, right? So it's trying to reinstate oppositions that simplify the way that we think about things like gender or sexuality, when in point of fact, we know better. And then finally, the last thing I'll mention is that by posing, or by sort of introducing the idea that maybe it's more sort of useful to think about what's going on through oppositions, it evokes, and I think this is really important for cultural studies, when we think about the way in which past conjunctures have been addressed, when did we talk about opposition, right? And also to the idea of opposition in relationship to antagonism. So rethinking this means in some ways revisiting things that might fall within the constellation of approaches we use in cultural studies. Some of the possible topics that we wrote up are, opposition as a right of refusal, right to self-defense, right to self-determination, and opposition in the field of violence. I ascribe both of these things to Marcuse's work. So inviting in, which we've always had a dialogue with, generations of critical approaches we associate with the Frankfurt School, it might be time to revisit that, right? It might be time to revisit political frameworks where organized forms of opposition teach us something about the various ways that we might constitute a political project in cultural studies, right? So I think that in this way, opposition is meant to evoke a kind of shifting lens, whether it pertains to the way we think about and interpret the relationship between meaning and practices, and how these things translate into a sort of social mobilization or a political framework on the one hand. And on the other hand, also thinking about the political project more broadly, right? Are we in an oppositional phase, or does it make sense to configure what's going on through the idea of opposition as opposed to sort of like the long framework of neoliberal resistance that has informed cultural studies for quite some time?
Yeah. Well, and I think being here in Chicago, the idea that what is counted or is called the opposition here is often seen as the thing to be opposed by the sort of federal government and the Bureau, the Border Patrol. That they're the ones who are really the opposition against this sort of uh, the the Antifa folks in the streets. So there's a lot of different ways that this framing allows for critical engagement with what's going on around the country, around the world. And right now, we're currently posting this to the Cultural Studies Association website. We'll have that posted by the end of the week, and we can include the link to that in the show notes once this episode is published. Any sort of final comments about the CFP?
The only thing I might add, again, for folks who maybe haven't been involved in the CSA as a professional organization and the conference itself, I've been attending. I think several of us have attended for many years, and I've always found it a very supportive and encouraging and collegial environment to make professional connections and to share ideas. And there's absolutely some strong advantages to being online in this particular year as an organization. I think it's great that we've adopted this biennial structure of being in person one year and being online the following year. So I would anticipate, if you do plan to submit for the conference, that this won't be a pop-in, pop-out kind of Zoom conference. I think you'll find attendees who are willing and able to participate in multiple sessions and tracks. And I think you'll find some vibrant and engaging conversation following presentation. So I do encourage everyone to have a look at the CFP and consider submitting.
Great. Well, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk about the CFP. And we are now going to speak with Pablo Castagno, who is going to tell us about the losses of the opposition in in the Argentinian election. Pablo is a professor of cultural studies at Universidad Nacional de la Matanza, Argentina. His latest book is ¿Qué hacen los Estudios Culturales?, which is available, I believe, as an open access resource in Spanish. His work on Latin American culture and political economy has appeared in journals such as Tabula Rasa, Cultural Studies, CCC, Communication, Capitalism, and Critique. Pablo is a longtime Cultural Studies Association colleague, and I think you said the virtual conference has been really really rewarding for you, since travel, and especially travel funding, is sometimes difficult. So,
absolutely. Thanks very much, Sean. Really good to see you again, Rob, and Mark too. So, and thanks for the invitation to talk about this election of Javier Milei, Freedom Advances, La Libertad Avanza, in the midterm elections, the last midterm elections in Argentina, in the context also of the links with the U.S. administration and so on.
We wanted to talk to you because in part because Trump just gave $20 billion and government funding and another $20 billion in private funding to prop up the Argentinian peso, and we're also increasing imports of Argentinian beef. So the New York Times reported yesterday that there's senators that are asking for Vice President Vance to abandon this policy. So these are all very politically fraught moves within the U.S., but they're attempts to shore up Argentinian President Milei in advance of the elections that happened. So I guess the first question is, what do you think is at stake in Milei's win, and what do you think do you think the U.S. interventions had an effect?
Well, connecting with the topic for the forthcoming CSA conference, as you said, I think that the basic meaning of this midterm election is that all the opposition that have mobilized during the last year and this year, like, for example, there were 2 general strikes by central unions. There were large demonstrations by students and professors during 3 large national demonstrations. Every Wednesday, there are protests from pensioners. There were mobilizations from human rights organizations and so on. So basically, the point is that during the last month, we thought that the government could start to decompose because of these oppositions, because they had lost midterm elections in some provinces, and because there are many scandals of corruptions, and because also of the financial crisis, because the government is unable to manage the accumulation of short-term debt. So, but the point is that 41% of the electorate voted for freedom advances, for La Libertad Avanza, Milei force across the country. If you sum up all the votes across the country, against 32% of the votes in hands of Fuerza Patria, which is the National Popular Front, so to speak.
We know those results now. So our condolences to you on that win.
Thanks for that. So the point is that despite the austerity programs, despite everything what this neoliberal attack, as I say, of Milei governments against working class people, against also national sovereignty and so on, even despite this context, the government managed to win the elections somehow. And so the point, I think, is that that part of the citizenry, that part of the electorate actually voted for him. It's not an election similar to the elections in which he became president, Milei, in 2023, in the sense that at that time there was a hegemonic crisis in the ruling bloc of the National Popular Government of Alberto Fernandez and Cristina Fernandez. There was a high inflation, and there were many signs that living conditions for working class people and for the middle classes weren't good. In that context, freedom advances managed to interpellate the citizens and somehow proposing another kind of program of political economy and so on. And they won the ballotage in 2023. But now, the point is that the government, even when it's having a lot of problems, a lot of troubles, even when it is unable to manage, for example, all the financial crisis and so on, in this context is that 41% of the electorate voted for this force. So it's like now the citizen a part of the citizens have saved Milei from the crisis, and I think that gives us a lot to think from a cultural studies standpoint. The relationship between culture, politics, and economy.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions that kind of raises. I mean, one might be what was at stake in Milei's win for the U.S. and do you think the interventions had any effect on the election? And maybe as a sort of illustration of that, the Wall Street Journal has published 7 different stories over the last few days about this. They've been very attentive, very interested in this election. This is a U.S. newspaper with ties to the Murdoch empire. And on Monday, they had a headline that said, Milei won a mandate for free market revolution in Argentina's election. So I don't know if you agree with that assessment, and is that what Trump's interventions were after?
Yes, I think that the intervention of the Trump administration was crucial for Milei to win this election. It doesn't explain all, of course, but the point is that in economic sense, the national currency was devaluing against the dollar during the last month very, very sharply. And basically the US intervention, like selling dollars and buying pesos, they sold about almost $2 billion in 2 weeks to maintain the value of the peso, buying pesos against the dollar. And then while they put those pesos in new bonds from the central bank and so on. That was one part of the intervention, and another was this kind of bailout, which is not basically a bailout, but it's a currency swap of $20 billion between the Trump administration. It's not signed by the Federal Reserve. It's done through the Trump administration. And another supposedly $20 billion that it could come from private banks, but we don't know the details of all this. Okay, so the intervention was crucial in maintaining the exchange rate between the peso and the dollar, and this is really important in Argentina because the dollar currency is it's highly appreciated by a large part of the population, in the sense that it means a lot in terms of stability. So, but that is the economic explanation, if you want. I think that there is an ideological explanation connected with that, which is that kind of phrase that Trump said. He said that if Milei lose the election, they were going to get out of Argentina. It means the support of the Trump administration and also the investment funds and so on. And I think that interpolated at least a part of the citizens. No, it doesn't explain all, but there is a kind of subjective formation, if you want, that believes that all the end of one world of the private environment where we live in terms of consumptions, in terms of monetary stability and so on. If that ends, it is the end of the world itself, something like that. I think that the Freedom Advances has managed to interpolate a part of the citizens in that sense. And in that ideological sense, those kind of discourses by Trump, I think that repeated across the media, of course, during the last 2 weeks, I think that they have had an effect, an important effect. And regarding the title of the Wall Street Journal, they talk about a mandate for free market revolution, as you say in one of the last pieces by the journal. I think that's right. That's right. They say market revolution. We say, analyzing that proposal, I say at least that it is a kind of class war, a class war that operates not through armed conflict. It operates through legal means, through financial means, through repression of the social protests. And they are doing a class war for the interests of global capital based in the United States, basically. So it is a kind of market revolutions for the benefit of the ruling classes in the United States and in Argentina, of course, too, which are which depends on the U.S.
So Pablo, this is I was thinking when you talked about the idea that the sort of infusion of the dollar, its appreciation, its valuation, in so many ways, there's a huge group of the citizenry that thinks that without this, it's not just, it's the end of Argentina, it's the end of the world itself. It's making me think about the idea that in part explains, right, or at least maps the idea that this would shore up and strengthen blocs that would ultimately go for Milei in this election. But I'm also, I kind of want to dig into this, and I want to know who constitutes or what groups constitute the bloc that cast their votes for Milei in this election. In particular, like, what are the strongest popular elements of the bloc, right? What narratives sustain this bloc, right? Clearly, you've already mentioned one, which is like the fear, right, that the U.S. abandons if Milei doesn't come back into power. But yes, there's also these other narratives, like we have to have a time of pain to get to the better time. That's, I think, another narrative that I hear very often when I read these articles or see. And I'm wondering too, like, what claims upon this bloc by the media or by Milei's government are shaky? Like, what aren't we seeing? What don't we know about the bloc are these blocks weak? You know, are there claims that groups allied actually aren't really allied, right? So, for example, what might we perceive in a bloc that exists in favor of Milei, like based on polling data, but the data is actually concealing more than it's revealing about support for Milei?
Yes, well, really important questions. I think that Freedom Advances has the support of the upper class, the part of the middle classes too, but also some kind of popular support. The popular support was stronger during the 2023 election, presidential election. I think that during the last year it has been decomposing, but still, it is still important. For example, in La Matanza district, where I teach, which is a district next to Buenos Aires city. Buenos Aires is a large metropolitan area. La Matanza is a former industrial district. It's a working class district. So during the 2023 election, Freedom Advances got 38% of the votes during the ballotage. They got 56% of the national vote during the ballotage, 38% in La Matanza. Now they got 32% in La Matanza. La Matanza is not only composed by working classes, but a substantial part of La Matanza they are, and they are getting votes in the popular, in the most popular areas of La Matanza too. So in terms of narrative, I think it's very complex. There is a class reaction. There has been a class reactions from the upper class and from the middle classes, or a part of the middle classes, the class reactions against the previous pink tide of center-left national popular governments of Cristina Fernandez and Néstor Kirchner and so on. I think that there is a class reaction in that sense. It is about the economy, but it's also about culture and ideology. There is a classism which is crucial, and it is expresses against any identity related to Peronism, which is the main popular force across the 20th century and the 21st century in Argentina. So a part of the Freedom Advances narrative goes against the Peronist identity, and it goes against what they call the political caste in a similar way as happens in the United States with Trump. And even there are some advisors of Trump also advising Freedom Advances and Milei and so on. That is part of the explanation. Another part of the explanation, I think important, is inflation, is the impact of inflation on living conditions. Inflation during the last year of Alberto Fernandez and Cristina Fernandez was about 200% annual inflation rate an annual inflation rate of 200%. Right now it's about 32%. And, inflation breaks all the social links and, expectations, identities, and so on. But at the same time, inflation gives the possibility to some political force to argue that the problem of the economy are the politicians. The problem of the economy is the caste. And that's, for example, how Adorno and Horkheimer, that you were mentioning before, in Dialectic of Alignment, they explain that, working people perceive how bad are the living conditions, how they perceive exploitation through prices, the relationship between prices and what you can buy with the income that you get. Okay, so the problem of inflation during the national popular government of center-left, timid center-left governments before, is that it gave freedom advances the chance to implement a narrative, a discourse, saying, well, the problem, the real problem is that populism is managing the economy and so on, and they are printing money, they are creating inflation, and that discourse has had a strong impact on working classes, on middle classes during these last years.
Yeah, that we've had some of that here, although it sounds like you've actually had inflation in Argentina. 200% is serious.
Yes, and what you say about the shaky elements, the not well-grounded views of the media on the support on Milei government, I think that a lot of these narratives are based on rational action theory, something like that. It's like a lot of the media discourses say, well, it is rational for this citizen, for this subject to vote for freedom advances because it's going to stop inflation, because now there is an austerity programs, but things are going to be better in the following months and so on, and that would be rational. And even a part of the analysis on freedom advances bought that kind of interpretation. And I think that what is shaky is that those media discourses don't take into account, conceal the kind of subjective destruction on which these discourses on supposed stability work. There is a destruction. The destruction is not only through the austerity programs, through their reduction, for example, of state spending on health and on education, on pension, and so on. There's also a destruction in terms of subjectivity. And I think that the media, the mainstream media, play a game legitimizing the destruction. That I think is my principal view, at least on this issue.
Right.
So Pablo, that actually, I wanted to raise a question from Argentina's past, right? Because one of the things I was thinking about was a big part of the sort of political production of subjectivity, right, has to do with organizations that in so many ways not only seek to sustain, but expand, like, public goods or social goods. And so, when I think about that, I think about the role that the Central de Trabajadores de la Argentina, the Central Union, played when it broke from the CNT. So the CNT in the early 90s supported the sort of Memist neoliberal project. And so this union forms, it's associated with the beginning of the Pink Tides, the factory reclamation movement, but the idea really of the expansion of public goods, incorporating piqueteros into factories when there are opportunities, supporting reclamation. So they were in many ways a place where the production of a political subjectivity that you've described as getting destroyed, right, was in so many ways not only getting fermented, but being embedded in these sort of, in these early stages of the Pink Tide. What happened to them today? Where are they today? What are they doing? Are they still active? And if so, how are they active?
Well, thanks for that question. I think that I really like the way you are framing the question in terms of the production of subjectivity. What was crucial of Central de Trabajadores Argentinos during the 90s, it is that they produce a new identity. They say at the beginning of the 90s, we're not going to represent just employed workers, we're going to represent also unemployed workers. We are representing state workers, but also other workers in the private sector. We are even representing small companies and other social organizations and so on. So the movement was strong. It was strong at the brink of the financial crisis of 2001, for example. Then, as you said, it got somehow absorbed. Some people say co-opted. Others say that there was a critical support from CTA, from Central de Trabajadores Argentinos, to Kirchner and Cristina Fernandez's government during the first decade of the 2000s. So then what happened is that what has been changing during the last years is that CTA has problems in renewing that production of subjectivity. Somehow the right has managed to cut the links between, for example, unemployed and employed workers, between state workers and private workers. Central de Trabajadores Argentinos, I think that so far it couldn't find a way. On the one hand, it is a political way. They tried to become, for example, a political party, but they didn't success. But also, it has problem in the cultural front, in connecting again these links across the working classes and the middle classes. There is a problem on that level, I think. And we will see if they manage to renew again. I think that there is also a problem in terms of the generations, the new generation. Somehow the organization didn't manage to renew, the leadership and so on in a very effective way. So basically, we are not seeing a strong opposition from the trade unions, at least on the on the high levels of the trade unions, despite some general strikes during the last year. And in this sense, for example, coming back to the support of the Trump administration, or the link actually with the Trump administration and the IMF that we didn't mention before. Apparently one of the results of this last election is that the government will pass a labor reform. They are sending today a labor reform to the parliament, and one of the main topic of the labor reform is a demand of the IMF that comes from the 90s, which is to end with collective bargaining, to end with all kind of collective bargaining, and to implement just agreements on the level of firms. So we will see if trade unions or organizations such as Central de Trabajadores Argentinos find a way to counteract that narrative and actually, policy they are trying to implement. If they succeed, if the government succeeds, I think that it will break a lot of the subjectivity and a lot of the social basis of the working class in Argentina throughout the decades.
You're muted.
There's a thread that seems to be running through about this sort of the relationship between the early 2000s, the pink tide, and this is something you kind of explore in your piece, looking at the rise of right-wing populism in Latin America. And it's certainly telling that at the same moment that the Trump administration is offering financial and trade support to Argentina, he's bombing boats and threatening a ground war with Venezuela, which is seen sort of like through the prism of the right wing as like a stronghold of Chavismo and the pink tide. So I don't know, and maybe I know that Rob also has a similar question about kind of authoritarian populism, but This pink tide in the conservative media reaction seems to figure into the rise of Milei and its relationship with the U.S.
Yes, absolutely. We have been researching, for example, the narrative of the media on Venezuela since the early 2000s. Okay, so this ultra-neoliberal attack of freedom advances and from similar forces across Latin America, it is based partially on a long media attack against populism, against the left, against Chavismo in Venezuela, and so on. So that is a main cultural, ideological force, if you want. But at the same time, thinking about the links between the Milei government and Trump administration, there is a tendency, for example, to interpret those links in terms of some, ideological articulation, in terms of some individual alliances between Trump and Milei and so on. And I think that something really much more structurally is going on. And it is praxis politically, it is praxis on the media, and it's also based on the movement of capital between the North and the South, between the United States and Latin American countries. I think that there is a geopolitical, structural recomposition, and through which, they try to get rid of any kind of obstacle for the free movement of capital between Wall Street and the South, to say,
right.
in some way. Okay.
So
I think, yeah.
Go ahead.
No. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, so like, just to wrap things up, I had that last question, which has to do with the idea of removing obstacles, right? Like, this is something that you'd written about too. And it was one of these passages I found in one of your most recent articles. I found it really fascinating, right? You were mentioned that Milei's authoritarian populism is not really like historical 20th century fascism, and you give a really good reason for it. You're like, you mentioned that 20th century fascism operated on the basis of class struggle and class ideology, right? But this is separate from that, right? The social and political formations that organize classes today are different from historical fascism, right? So the political consolidation of class fractions to support an emergent political party do not find a ready-made set of positions in existing parties, right? You lean on Polancis a lot. So like the class positions have changed over time and they've sedimented over time. And there isn't this sort of like party structure that would give rise to class ideologies. So are we seeing, like with Milei, are we seeing accidents or contingencies of political adventurism and experimentation that in some ways actually kind of amount to an ersatz fascism, because that class ideology basis and that organizational basis just isn't there? Like a poor substitution for 20th century fascism because of the lack of the political maturation of classes into politics. Is that maybe another way of talking about what's going on in the Milei project, the political project?
Yes. I'm a kind of reluctant to use the category of fascism in the sense that I don't see any kind of mass mobilization. I don't see corporatism. I don't see an anti-capitalist ideology in freedom advances and Milei government. And in that sense, I argue that they are not fascists. They are ultra-neoliberals. They are extreme neoliberals. They feed on the Austrian school and so on. All, for example, the policies they have implemented on deregulating the economy clearly go in that direction, in the direction of guaranteeing the free movement of capital between the South and the North, back and forth the country, of course, in a neo-colonial structure formation, if you want. So that is a part of the explanation. But after saying all this, I think that we need to use the category of fascism in a dialectical way, in the sense that, you know, I think that it was von Mises who wrote in some book, in a book in the first part of the 20th century, he wrote that during a crisis, fascism could guarantee the return of liberal ideas. Okay, so coercion and violence was for him a way to guarantee the supremacy of what they call civilization and so on. So in this sense, I would argue now that freedom advances is fascist. It mirrors on fascism. They are ultra-neoliberals, but they mirror on the use of violence against social protests and so on. I think that in the same way Trump administration does in the United States. And in this sense, as for example, Franco Bifo Berardi has written in many books, that there is a social psychological dimension of fascism that is present now in the right-wing governments, in the right-wing forces, and so on. And I think it is related to this production of fear. It is related to the production of paranoia. It is related to the production of what the Frankfurt School called Schadenfreude, you know, which is, as Adorno and Horkheimer explains in the Dialectic of Enlightenment, is the pleasure a person can experience from the misfortune, from the disgrace, from the cruelty imposed on others. This is what Freedom Advances is doing. It's doing a politics of cruelty against unemployed people, against feminist women, against teachers, against student movements, and so on and on, trying to break actually all kind of solidarity within the social masses and within each individual too. So in this sense, they are fascists.
Yeah, that's a very similar way that I think Quinn Slobodian talks about Hayek's Bastards. I don't know if you've read this or seen this recent book, but he has a sort of actually drawing on von Mises and going back to von Mises and talking about the way that the kind of ordo neoliberal consolidation has that same kind of dimension in the U.S. So unfortunately, we have that that's another way that we're in solidarity with you, is that we're facing the same or a different kind of variety of the same fascism. So thanks for joining us and giving us this insight into what's going on in Argentina today, Pablo.
Thanks for the invitation. It was really nice to talk with you.
Yeah. Well,
wonderful talking with you and seeing you again.
Yeah, we'll see you at the conference.
We'll see you at the conference. Yes.
Yeah. So next Wednesday, November 5th at 11 a.m. Chicago time, we'll be discussing the topic of authoritarian sexual politics with the authors of several papers from a forum in communication and critical cultural studies. Cultural Studies Association governing board member and editor of this forum, Megan Wood, will be joining us with two of the other authors to discuss papers looking at misogyny, transphobic policies, and feminist militarism. These are things that have become especially ascendant with Trump and the kind of current administration, but also in the culture at large. So again, if you registered with Zoom, the same link should work. And if you're joining on YouTube, it will be streaming here again. This episode will also be available on Breaking Culture Live YouTube channel with the show notes. We'll kind of update the show notes with some of the links we've just talked about. But please share it with your colleagues and let us know if you have any ideas for future episodes or invitees by emailing us at breakingculturelive@gmail.com.
Thanks again for joining us. I'm Rob Carley.
And I'm Sean Johnson Andrews. Please check out my Substack at breakingculture.substack.com. Until next time,